Amazing Spider-Man 2 stars Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, Emma Brick as the girl who dies at the end, Django Shocks as a member of the Blue Man Group, and Paul Giamatti as the Big Fat Rhino. So the movie starts out, and it's basically Star Trek 3. Lens flares everywhere. Stuff happens to Peter's parents. No one cares at all. And then it cuts to Spider-Man being, Spider-Man, and he sees Big Fat Rhino doing stuff. He's like, no, you can't do that. And then it just ends. And then Peter and Gwen break up, and yeah. And then it shows Harry Osborn next to Norman Osborn's deathbed, and then Norman Osborn's like, "You're never Paris, son. Look at me." And then he just goes out of the bed, and he's like all green and stuff. He's like, "I have goblinitis," or whatever it was. And then he goes, "Oh yeah, did I tell you it was genetic?" And then so apparently now Harry Osborn's gonna become Green Man now, and then we see Max Dillon, and Max Dillon is like the big old cartoony nerd that like no one cares about pretty much. And he goes to Oscorp, and then he runs into Gwen Stacy. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is Spider-Man." And then so yeah, Harry has a meeting, and he looks like a hipster. And one of the members comes up to him, and he's like, "Oh, there's Peter Parker here. See you." And Harry walks out, and he goes, "Oh, Peter, I haven't seen you in 10 years, you little nerd." And then he goes, "Oh, you got unibrows still." And then Peter's all like, and as this is happening, Max Dillon is like all crusty and stuff, like in a body crust. He looks like the Thing from Fantastic Four, and so he gets all the crust off of him, and then he turns into a member of the Blue Man Group, and then he walks out, and then so Peter and Gwen meet up, and then when they meet up, they're like, "Oh yeah, we like each other again," and then Gwen Stacy pulls the biggest cock block, and then says, "Oh, I'm going to England." And then Peter's like, "England?" And then Electro goes in Times Square and drains everybody's power and stuff. And then Spider-Man shows up. He's like, "Hey, no, you can't do that." And they fight to dubstep. And then so some important stuff happens for like 30 minutes. And then Peter does some things to really, really, really heavy metal. And then it turns out that Harry needs Peter's blood. "I need Spider-Man's blood. I'm dying because it will cure my goblinitis." And so he's like, "Peter, get me to talk to Spider-Man." And Peter's like, "I'll try, And that happens, but it doesn't go too well. And then Max Dillon turns out to be at Ravencroft, which is kind of like the Arkham Asylum of the things. Some like nerdy scientist goes up to him and he's like, hey, what's your name? What is your name?" To like classical music. And then he goes, "Don't you know I'm Electro?" And then he breaks his glasses, and the guy's like, "Very impressive." And then Harry breaks Electro out of prison, and they kind of team up, and they go to Oscorp because earlier in the film, someone sets Harry up, and Harry like no longer works at Oscorp or something weird. And then so they get this one guy to get Harry into the basement where they have like a bunch of Sinister Six, because like Sony was marketing that out of the butthole. And then so they take this stuff and they inject Harry with it, and it's the stuff from the spiders. And then basically like he wigs out, and then he basically becomes Green Goblin, and Electro and Spider-Man fight. And at this big power plant where it was like Max Dillon's plans or something, I can't remember. And then Electro gets hit by a car from Gwen Stacy, and they're fighting, and then Gwen's like, "Oh, we need to turn the power back on in the city." So they do that somehow, and then as they're doing that, Electro dies. And then Harry flies in out of nowhere, and then he flies in, and then Spider-Man's facing one side, and then Gwen Stacy's facing the other. And then he looks at Gwen Stacy, and I want to say this for a minute. He looks at her, and then he looks back at Spider-Man, and he just goes, "Peter." And then he goes, "Oh no, it's Harry. Oh Jesus, Harry, we'll get you better." And he goes, "No, you took away the thing I love. Now we're gonna take away what you love." And no, he takes Gwen, and then Peter's on top of a tower. He throws her into a clock tower, but Spider-Man catches her. And then Green Goblin and Peter are like fighting on this clock tower while Spider-Man's holding Gwen. And then the web that Spider-Man's holding Gwen with is in between one of the gears. And then all of a sudden, like, the gears somehow snap Spider-Man's web, and Gwen just basically goes plummeting down in like slow motion. And then he tries to catch her, I mean, he does, but you just see he catches her at the last second, but her head cracks on the concrete. And then you hear a neck snap, and then he goes, "Oh, she's all fine now." And then he goes down there, and he's like, "Gwen, Gwen, 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 no, Gwen, 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 we're gonna make you fine, Gwen." And then she starts like bleeding out of her nose, and then she dies. And then Harry, no, Peter's being a little moody man now, and he's like, "Oh, I know, I caused this." And then the big fat rhino breaks out of prison under the commands of like the Sinister Six being built or something like that. And then Spider-Man shows up after like the absence of 6 months, and then they fight, and that's how it ends.